Hello, class. Okay, so this week for Module 2, Week 2 for EDUC 6910, second block, we are focusing on exploring and defining what is exemplary teaching, the type of successful teaching that teachers in the 21st century need to educate all learners. So we talked about that in the overview of our course for week 1, and now we're already zooming into week 2. And this week we decided we're going to focus on exactly what is exemplary teaching. Then we'll start digging into why isn't it widespread or mainstream. Okay, so for this session, what I would like to do is to introduce you to some of the things that we're going to need to understand as we're going through examples of exemplary teaching. The reason I wanted to make a little video and talk you through it a little bit is because it's not like a shopping checklist where you have some different ingredients and you make sure that you have all the ingredients and then you just put them together in a recipe. It's more like an art. So there are specific ingredients, but the way that they come together is going to be manifest a little differently because teaching is an expression of yourself. And so teachers are not cookie cutters. And so what I do is going to look a little different than what you do. But the thing that underlies it, there's not this chaos of like who decides what it is. It's kind of like defining art. You know, there will be different manifestations of it, but there are criteria, there are guidelines, there are principles that underlie what is art and what is not. And the same thing with exemplary teaching, we actually do have principles and frameworks that even though educators will express themselves differently, especially because their students are different, there are underlying principles that are the same. And so that's where, remember, we talked a little bit about that with the Judeo-Christian tradition, where there was a movement from more like rules and focus on the technical sort of things like specific steps that could be taken during a week. And then they moved to a more of a principle based. And that's what we're doing too, is we're saying that underlying exemplary teaching for all learners, we're focusing on the kind of teaching that happens when these exemplary teachers are successful with the students that other teachers continue to fail with. And we have whole groups of children and adolescents and learners who have never been well served by US public schooling. So clearly we don't have exemplary teaching and learning for all students, but we know it's possible because there's always been a strand of teaching that these exemplary teachers have continued to be successful, even where other teachers have not been successful. And when you think about it, it's not like with a recipe where it's like, I have to teach you step 1, step 2, step 3. You have to be able to think in a way that allows you to adapt to what is happening around you, because there's no way that I or anyone else can teach you every single thing that you need to know. What you need is a way to think about your thinking, a way to think about your teaching, so that you are not saying, well, wait a minute, what was step 5? You see, that's kind of a technocratic sort of a view of it. This is more of like an art-based format where you have underlying principles, and I don't have to teach you how to do every single step, because I could never think of every single thing you're going to have to respond to anyway. It's much more of a holistic kind of principles based orientation where you're constantly evaluating, is this the way my classroom should sound like, feel like, look like when exemplary teaching and learning is going on? We do have a good sense of what it should feel like, what it should sound like, what it should look like. So we talked a little bit last week about what some of those principles are. And we talked about that exemplary teachers, they always have in their teaching and learning, they have a high focus on high levels of academic achievement. They also have high levels of cultural competency, where they themselves, as well as their students, they're promoting these high levels of being able to shift into different cultural spaces. So, for example, in the football world down here in the South, the New Orleans Saints are very popular here. And for a long time, you would see bumper stickers and you would hear people say, and you would see t-shirts and hats that say, "Who dat?" The Who Dat Nation. And so it was kind of an appropriation of Black English. And you know that if somebody's walking around saying "who dat," usually that would be seen as, quote, bad English. And so, but if you happen to be white and walked and talked and looked like you were middle class, and you walked and talked and said "who dat," people wouldn't necessarily think that you were undereducated or stupid or anything like that. So you'd have to know, like, when is it appropriate to use terms like "who dat," and when would it be appropriate to say "who is that?" So you'd have to know when to switch registers. And we do know that, because if I'm at the club with my friends, I'm going to speak differently to the people around me than I would, like, say, if I'm at church or at a funeral, right? So we do know that we have these competencies in different spaces. And so educators who are exemplary, they're not only pushing high levels of academic achievement, but they're also pushing high levels of cultural competency so that they can walk in multiple worlds successfully. They can be Black and successful in school. They can be Indigenous and successful in school. They don't have to subtract from themselves and be successful in school. And then the socio-political awareness is the third one that we talked about last week. And that's an awareness of what is in the world around us. Like, we might learn as white people to filter out, like, who's going to college, why do our campuses look so white? And then when we go to certain professions and certain jobs and certain places like prisons, why do they look so brown and so Black? So we might, learn not to be aware of that, but actually it's pretty visible. And so being aware of what's around us and taking notice of that is that awareness, that socio-political awareness. Okay, so those are the 3 principles. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on looking at scenarios and case studies and descriptions of exemplary teachers. And so that we can say, okay, this is exemplary, this is not. So we want to get a definition of what exemplary teaching looks like, feels like, so that we can begin to differentiate what is and what isn't. And you're going to need to know how to pivot And so I have a little story that I'd like to share with you, and you will have access to this story on Canvas as well. It's called Butterflies. And the story is important because it demonstrates the pivot that I'm going to ask you to make when we're looking at what is and is not exemplary teaching. Okay, so that will help us to kind of define. Remember, we wanted to look at what is and is not exemplary teaching so that we could begin to flesh out what would be some of our projects that we'll do for this class. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to go through this story with you and show you the pivot. Okay, so hopefully this will be helpful to you. Okay, all right, so it's called Butterflies. Let me put my glasses on. Butterflies. The grandmother plaited her granddaughter's hair, and then she said, "Get your lunch. Put it in your bag. Get your apple. You come straight back after school, straight home here. Listen to the teacher," she said. "Do what she say." Her grandfather was out on the step. He walked down the path with her and out onto the footpath. He said to a neighbor, "Our granddaughter goes to school. She lives with us now. She's fine," the neighbor said. "She's terrific with her two plaits in her hair. And clever," the grandfather said. "Writes every day in her book. She's fine," the neighbor said. The grandfather waited with his granddaughter by the crossing, and then he said, "Go to school. Listen to the teacher. Do what she say." When the granddaughter came home from school, her grandfather was hoeing the cabbages. Her grandmother was picking beans. They stopped their work. "You bring your book home?" the grandmother asked. "Yes." "You write your story?" "Yes." "What's your story?" "About the butterflies." "Get your book then. Read your story." The granddaughter took her book from her school bag and opened it. "I killed all the butterflies," she read. "This is me, and this is all the butterflies." "And you teach her? She liked the story, did she?" "I don't know." "What your teacher say?" "She said butterflies are beautiful creatures. They hatch out and fly in the sun. The butterflies visit all the pretty flowers," she said. "They lay their eggs and then they die. You don't kill butterflies." That's what she said. The grandmother and the grandfather were quiet for a long time, and their granddaughter, holding the book, stood quite still in the warm garden. "Because you see," the grandfather said, "your teacher, she buy all her cabbages from the supermarket. That's why." Think about that story for a minute. Does it make sense to you what the grandfather said? Because you see, your teacher, she buy all her cabbages from the supermarket. That's why.
Is there something else I can help with?
Sorry about my watch. So why is it that what's going on here in this story? So think about what we're talking about exemplary teachers, and think about this teacher. What's going on here? You've got a diverse situation, right? Diverse, different from what? Okay, let's look at it. What are some of the things that you notice? Did you notice that the little girl lives with her grandparents? So already we're seeing that this family is not what we might think of as the ideal type. They're not the normative standard of two parents, the mom and the dad and the biological children. That's not this family. It's grandparents raising a granddaughter, right? We don't know where the biological parents are, but we know it's grandparents raising her. So right off the bat, you've got a different family situation. What else do we know? Think about maybe the language that is being used. It seems like it's a different dialect, right? It might be kind of like who dat is a form of English, but it's not maybe quote standard English. And so we know these grandparents, we get some sense of that, the way that they talk, right? Listen to the teacher, do what she say. We get some sense that the rhythm of language isn't necessarily a middle class United States English. They may be immigrants to the United States. They may be working class. For whatever their situation is, it doesn't come across as middle class white mainstream English. Okay, so that is some difference from the white mainstream. Okay, and so we notice that, and then the child is learning some literacy, right? She's writing in her storybook there. And so then you have this situation here where the grandparents ask her, they're clearly interested in her education, right? And so they say, did your teacher like the story? And the little girl, she says she doesn't know, but actually she does know, doesn't she? And she says, the teacher, she liked your story? And did she? And the little girl says, I don't know. And then they ask her, what your teacher say? She said, butterflies are beautiful creatures. They hatch out and fly in the sun. So really the little girl understands that the teacher does not like her story, right? So here you have a situation, and the grandparents too are aware that the teacher doesn't like the child's story. And how do we know that? They don't say anything for a long time, right? So if we say, well, the grandparents don't value education, well, that's not true, right? They did encourage the granddaughter to pay attention to the teacher, to follow her instructions, to learn from her. And then they see that there's a conflict between the child's story of killing the butterflies and the teacher's story, where the teacher is saying, no, that's not the right story. And we know that the teacher thinks that that's the wrong story because the teacher tells the little girl what the right story is. And she says, they're beautiful. We don't kill them. They visit the flowers, they lay eggs, and then they die. We don't kill butterflies. Okay, so the teacher clearly told the little girl, your story is the wrong story. Okay, so we have this situation here where the school knowledge represented by the teacher is not the same as the child's knowledge. And the grandparents pause because they're aware of this gap here. And then they try to explain for the teacher what's going on. They say, well, she buy her cabbages in the store, in the supermarket. Okay, so why is that important? The reason that's important is that the grandparents are explaining to their granddaughter, look, your teacher's not from this rural community where we grow crops. And we do kill butterflies because they ruin our crops. And this is how we make our income. This is how we support our families. This is how we buy our groceries. our income comes in from raising cabbages, and butterflies actually kill our crops. And so for us, they're not beautiful creatures that lay eggs and fly around. They're actually pests that threaten our ability to take care of our family. The teacher doesn't know that because she simply goes to the grocery store, picks up a cabbage, and purchases it. Do you see how the different backgrounds mean that they have different understandings of butterflies? So here we're in a very critical situation when we think about exemplary teaching. This teacher has a decision to make, right? Because the child is in the more vulnerable position. They are a child. The teacher has the institutional authority. They have the license. They are the adult. They are the one who write the grades out. So the teacher is the responsible one here. Okay. So the teacher, she clearly shows that she doesn't know the children's background in her classroom. So she told the child, you have the wrong story. Okay. So now, if she continues to insist on the child having the wrong story, then she's putting her experience and her limited experience, her single story, which is the only truth that she knows, she's putting that on the child. So now the child is now the one who has to make some decisions. So the child she's got a couple of ways to respond, right? The child she could really accept the teacher's story and say, yep, what my teacher says goes. My teacher is my teacher, and I'm supposed to listen to her. And she doesn't like my story, and I know she doesn't. And so I'm going to write like the teacher's story. The teacher says we don't kill butterflies, that they're beautiful and they fly away. Okay. And I know at my house and in my grandparents and in my community, they do kill butterflies. So therefore, my grandparents have the wrong story. My grandparents are bad. My community's bad. I'm bad because we kill butterflies. So I better get rid of this bad stuff, and I'm going to be like the teacher. So that's one option, and that's called subtractive, right? That's not cultural competency at all, with being able to walk in two worlds, because this child's getting a message. My story is the wrong story. So I know the teacher's telling me in her own way, I'm getting the message, and I clearly understand the message. The teacher, she liked your story, did she? I don't know. She does know. The teacher did not like her story. The teacher told her to write story. So the child could say, okay, I got the wrong story. I'm subtracting myself. And anytime you subtract yourself, you're saying, I am not enough. I am not okay the way I am. I need to be more like you. Okay, that's a problem, right? It's always a problem. You start subtracting people's humanity, you start destroying them. Okay, so the little girl, she's a little girl. So she could do that. She could be like, I need to subtract my story. I need my story to be your story, and try to adopt the teacher's story. She could also take a different strategy. She could say, you know what? Oh, in my neighborhood, I know that we kill butterflies, and my grandparents do it, my neighbors do it, everybody in our neighborhood, we kill butterflies, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't care what you say about it. That's my story. So now you got this conflict between the teacher story and the child story, and the child is in the lesser power position. So if the child is confronting the teacher and saying, this is my story and I'm sticking to it, well, you know what happens with belligerent children and adolescents and children that don't follow rules, and children that act up and resist. We have places for them, right? We have retract programs for them. We expel them. We put them in special education sometimes. We put them in behavior management classrooms. We have all kinds of places where we put kids who can't follow rules and get along. So that's not likely to be a good option either if the child is learning, well, I have the wrong story, but this is my story and I'm sticking to it. And I promise you that as a third grade teacher myself, I promise you that these 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds already have a very strong sense of whether they have the right story or the wrong story. When I started teaching third grade, on my first day of teaching third grade, I told you about how the little girl drew a picture of herself giving me the finger. She had chosen that this is my story and I'm sticking to it. And I see what these teachers are like, and you're just one more of them. And I'm going to fight you because my sense of myself and my respect for and my dignity as a human being is under threat from you people, and I'm going to hang on to it. That's a hard row to hoe, right? And so some of them, they give up. They're just like 8 and 9 years old, and they're like, I'm not good at school. I don't learn very well. It's like, you're only 8 and 9, but they've already been learning since kindergarten, first grade, second grade. They've been learning, I'm not good at school. So even by 8 and 9 years old, they've been learning that. So you can see already the conflict that's coming here. So you've got children, these are children, whether they are in the 10th grade, the 11th grade, the 12th grade, these are vulnerable populations because they're students. As the teacher, we are the responsible one. We're the ones with the institutional authority. So the children have these limited ways of responding. And the butterfly girl here, either way, she's in a jam, right? She can say, this is my story, it's my truth, I'm sticking to it, and I will defend my sense of myself. Or she can say, myself is clearly a problem here. Let me get rid of myself and I'm going to try to be yourself. Well, that's designed for failure too, right? So either way, subtractive or resistant, uh, it doesn't work well for the child. There's not learning going on there. You end up with an I-it relationship rather than an I-thou. So the teacher here is critical. The teacher has to pivot. So not to blame the teacher, because this teacher may, like most teachers, drive into the community and not live in the community. Some teachers do live in the community and they do know. We have that in Utah where you have rural communities, and sometimes you have teachers who are from there, grew up there, they know about the issues in the community. But many times you have teachers who are coming in from other areas, they don't reflect the background of the children or the students, the learners, and therefore they don't know. They buy their cabbages in the store. So nothing wrong with buying the cabbages in the store. The issue is, what do you do about that? So if you are an exemplary teacher, you've got to find a way to pivot. You've got to figure out, well, I buy my cabbages in the store, but my students do not. What can I do so that I can bridge that? So if I'm an exemplary teacher and I'm the butterfly girl teacher, her teacher, then I'm not going to ask her to subtract herself. I know she's got to be able to walk in both worlds. She's got to be able to understand about the world where where fruits and vegetables come from the grocery store, but there's nothing wrong with her world either, right? So even though it might not be high status, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't just want to bring students' background into the classroom because it makes the medicine go down a little easier. We want to bring it into the classroom because it belongs in the classroom. Do you see the difference there? So sometimes when people are using, say, primary languages, for example, maybe Chinese, maybe Spanish, maybe Vietnamese, and they're trying to use the primary language to launch them into English, that's actually problematic in the sense that you're only using the primary language to make the medicine and create them into your own image a little smoother. But actually, their primary languages do belong in the classroom because they belong in the classroom. There's nothing inherently better about English as a language of instruction, even though it is privileged in the United States as the language of instruction. Do you see the difference there? So if you're going to pivot and you're the butterflies girls teacher, then you are going to promote high levels of academic achievement. So you're going to have her write her story. That was a good start. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to tell her that her story is the wrong story. You're going to share with her that there are different stories, that that's her story and that's her experience, and it's a legitimate story, and she's going to be exposed to and aware that some people buy their cabbages from the store. So the reality of the socio-political consciousness here is that as a teacher, I'm going to be aware that being from the country and being from a farming community, that's the low status, that they're often not paid as much. Their jobs are much more unstable. So they might be facing a lot of economic challenges. They might be facing job insecurity. They might be facing issues with housing, with having to be following the crops. There's all kinds of things that could be associated with that kind of a job, which is not the more middle class kind of a job that maybe the teacher is more used to and working with. So she's going to be aware of that and take that into account as she's designing her lessons. So she's going to focus on high levels of academic achievement. She's going to be focusing on building that cultural competency so that this little girl and as well as her classmates are walking in both worlds, that they can be from the farm and raise cabbages and successful in school. And they can be aware that, yes, it is grueling work that is often not valued. So there's realities that children know about, even if you don't know about it. And so to acknowledge that and to be able to not suggest to them that their feelings and their experiences aren't real, because they do often pay attention to what their teachers say. And if their teachers say it's the wrong story and we don't kill butterflies, then they often do try to subtract themselves, even if they are older ones and they don't want to demonstrate so much that they care about what you think as a teacher. They often do. So do you see what that point about having to pivot is? So this is just a little introduction to what that pivot is. Does the teacher in this butterfly story, does she pivot? We don't know because the story ends here, but we could write her story for her. If we see that this teacher continues to tell the same story of we don't kill butterflies, and she's never aware that sometimes you do need to kill butterflies, then it's likely that she's going to be part of putting a whole bunch of kids on the school to prison pipeline, and she's going to be pushing the kids right out of school and becoming a dream wrecker, not a dream keeper. Okay, so if we write a different ending to this story, and we help this teacher become an exemplary teacher, she's going to know how to respond to the context that her students are coming from. She's going to be able to bring their backgrounds as assets into the classroom and affirm her students' backgrounds so that she treats them as I, thou. So she doesn't have to know about how to be a farmer. That's not her job. But can she learn to appreciate and value it? Yes, she can. She can work with the grandparents and she can learn from them and actually be a partner with them instead of expecting them to come in and be her extra helping hands or whatever it is. So that pivot is very critical when we're talking about what are exemplary teachers. Okay, so that's a little introduction to what we're going to be exploring this week. And I'm going to, at the end of the module, I'm going to want to get a sense of how do you feel you're coming with that pivot? Do you not, are you making the pivot, but more, can you distinguish between the pivot? If it's more of a traditional teaching as the business as usual, where schools continue to perpetuate existing inequities, or is it a pivot to exemplary teaching, where you have teaching and learning that is successful for all learners, including the learners that have historically been left behind? Okay, all right, hope you enjoyed that. It's going to be a great module, and I'm so glad that you are in our class. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this.